feel strange. My goodness. Okay. I feel strange. Where are you? My goodness. Oh, I got some right there. Oh. Wow. Hey, Stephen, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing well.
Forgive the furiousness here. This is our kind of pre-show bit where I get to share everything around Facebook. And then it's just a bit of a harried time. As I've said very, very often, Facebook has some of the best programmers on the planet, but yet you have to share things like this individually. You cannot do them with one button. Oh, there's Kevin.
Let my sister know that's where she works.
Oh yeah, at Facebook? Group. Okay, now we're doing our group sharing. Not that one. That one. Here. Yeah, they might reject it. Here. My goodness, I belong to a lot of groups. That's a good thing, I guess. We'll be right live very shortly, everyone. Just hang on. Couple of shares to try to do next. Try to work. About a minute. Just about a minute. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Please don't think me rude right now. I'm just doing all of our, getting the program out to all the different places that we share. It's a hectic little bit of time here. I need to turn the ringer down. That away. And here we are. And okay. About just a few more seconds, everyone. I will push the button for the radio side. I'd like to give them a little extra minute. And then we will be right after it. I will allow you, gentlemen, to introduce yourselves and tell everybody about yourselves. I'm not here to define anyone, but we'll do that. You can talk about yourself better than me. So we shall do that. Just waiting for 5:01, then we're going to go live on the radio around the world, but no pressure. And there we go. So we will be live in 3, 2, 1.
Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
Do you want a man for president who's seasoned through and through, but not so doggone seasoned that he won't try something new? A man who's old enough to know
And young enough to do.
well, it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you.
But it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
Do you want a man with spirit who is not afraid to fight?
A man whose record shows that he will fight for what is right.
A loyal man who'll bring the job a fresh new point of view.
Well, it's up to you, it's up to you.
It's strictly up to you.
Cause it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
And do you deny to any man the right he's guaranteed to be elected president, no matter what his creed?
It's promised in the Bill of Rights to which we must be true.
So it's up to you, it's up to you.
It's strictly up to you.
And it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
Do you like a man who answers straight, a man who's always fair? We'll measure him against the others, and when you compare, you cast your vote for Kennedy and a change that's overdue. So it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you. Yes, it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy,
Welcome, 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 welcome from my humble second bedroom here in the Saucon Valley, in the township formerly known as Lower Saucon, now a wholly owned subsidiary of the Bethlehem Landfill and Waste Management, considering their outright and open purchase of our town council. Here in the Saucon Valley, part of the Lehigh Valley in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, part of these United States, on this planet Earth, the only one we have, the third rock from the sun in the Terran solar system, part of the Milky Way galaxy. This is the Kennedy Effect Live for the 6th of February, 2022. You are all waiting with bated breath to see if I said 2021. I didn't. Put that one down for the host. The host gets one good check mark there that he didn't say the wrong year. It is really great to be back with you. Let me quickly try to explain what has been happening here. You do not tune in to hear about my health. You do not tune in to hear overly personalized stories, or at least I don't think so, or maybe some do, maybe some don't. And I will get to my guests, and I will get to the program itself, and very, very quickly, as my patient, wonderful guests are hanging out with us right now, getting to hear this terrible story, this very boring story, to be honest, probably. So two Saturdays ago, 2 Fridays ago, I worked from 5:30 in the morning until 1:30 in the morning, and woke up the following Saturday, the next day. So that was 2 weeks ago now. The date is escaping me. I guess it doesn't much matter. Woke up terribly, terribly nauseous. Broke into an absolutely soaking sweat. Absolutely drenched. Managed to get a shower, got myself downstairs, and then sat in a chair and couldn't move for another maybe 6 hours. Until Kristen finally convinced me to go to the ER. She called a doctor and said, "You need to get there immediately." And then spent another, so I guess it was like 3-4 in the afternoon, then proceeded to spend another 8-ish hours, I think till like 11 at night in the ER. And was told that I met the literal definition of exhaustion. I was dehydrated, I had a migraine, I have further damage to my neck and my back, and was literally dehydrated and exhausted. I was dizzy, I couldn't see, couldn't think, couldn't stand, walk, could barely do anything. And because we were at the hospital so late, I just thought it was a better decision. And my very honored guests were kind enough to come back 2 weeks later, because we had scheduled them for that show. And so we took 2 weeks off. And I am still not right. I've barely been able to walk this weekend, as whatever is happening at the bottom of my back is quite properly happening. We'll have to see if we can get that checked out. But the bottom line is that we're back and we are somewhat lucid and thinking a bit. Thank God I have great guests, because when I flake out, I'm sure they will continue to talk, and in a wonderful, wonderful way. But I just thought I owed you a bit of an explanation as to why we disappeared for 2 weeks. So my health is still not right, but at least I'm well enough to be here with you, and we will be here for the duration of the program. We will not be here next week. Enjoy the Super Bowl. And by the way, as a soccer fan myself, as a proper European football fan myself, when everyone tells you that the Super Bowl is the largest watched sporting event on the planet, they are lying to you desperately. That would be the Premier League and the World Cup. About almost 2/3 of the planet watches that. 2/3 of the planet will not be watching the Super Bowl because they don't care. But enough Americans will, that precludes me from being here. And then we will come back to you the following week. But let me get to the program this evening and my guests. This is a topic and a program that I have wanted to do since the early stages of this program. Way, way back in the beginning, when we had no radio outlets, no TV outlet, and we shared the program to about a dozen places. This is a topic I wanted to broach. Someone will correct me on my grammar. And I have wanted to ever since. And it was extremely difficult, and considering that we've never had a program like this, as you can imagine, somewhat impossible to get anyone to come on and speak about what are quite possibly very sensitive subjects. There's a chance, if you are someone of deep, deep, deep faith, you could be offended by what we're going to discuss today. I don't think so. I don't think you should, but I could understand possibly if that would happen. For those folks who are not folks of deep faith, this might not interest you. But this is a topic that I've wanted to broach and understand and learn about. If you've ever wanted me to get my comeuppance on this program and really get taught something, today's probably the day, because I'm not a theologian, I'm not a biblical scholar. I consider myself a person of faith, but I'm not a regular churchgoer. I don't, I'm not certainly not a member of the clergy.
So if you want to see me get taught a lesson here, today's probably the day. But I wanted to talk about something that I think is uncomfortable, or at least could be uncomfortable, but I also think is quite dangerous. And it's something that I think we need to be made aware of and that we need to discuss openly, honestly, truthfully. And that is the difference for me, and we'll discuss it. Maybe I'm a lone wolf here. The difference between Christianity itself and the evangelical movement. Because if we look at an honest way of what the evangelical movement has been pushing in this country and the political figures they have been backing, there's a pretty deep drought of actual Christianity in that message. And we also want to talk about how faith and religion, and someone was already kind enough to comment in the comments, and I'll get to that in a second. Judy was kind enough to say that faith and religion are two different things. I do not disagree. I think they very well may be. But both faith and religion have been weaponized in our country now and used as a way to bludgeon the other side when they don't agree with you or when you're not in power. And that's all part of what we're going to be discussing today. For wherever you might be on Facebook, the nearly 100 places we have shared the program, please feel free to stay exactly where you are and continue to watch, listen. If you're having dinner, getting the kids ready for school, whatever it might be, please stay there and enjoy the program. However, if you wish to comment, if you want to ask questions, if you want to engage with us, we ask you to look at that square on your screen there on your top right corner and come to our home group Facebook page, that other side of information. I will see your questions and comments there. I do not see them any of the other places that we share the program, only on our home group Facebook page. To our friends and family at hot101.net, thank you for welcoming me back to the airwaves. I appreciate you so very much, and we are very, very proud to be part of the hot101.net family. If you don't know how to listen to hot101.net, it is very simple. Our name is our web address. It's hot101.net. You can tell your Alexa to play hot101.net. There's an Apple app in the Apple App Store. There is an Android app in the Google Play Store, and the TuneIn radio app will work on any device. Just search for hot101.net. And to our other friends and family at TCP, the Culture Professional out of Lancaster, their global internet radio, WTCP, their Roku channel, TCP, and of course, their very large Facebook following, TCP. We are proud to be part of this family as well. You can never have enough friends and family. But let me get to our very honored, very patient, really, truly patient, because we had this, like I said, we had this set up for 2 weeks ago. And then, health interfered, and they have been kind enough to stay, kind of hang in there and stay with us and give us another day. And so we're here February 6th live. I will let them introduce themselves. As you know, I don't like to define anybody. I want you to tell them who they are. So we welcome them to the program. Let's start with Kevin. Kevin, welcome, sir, to the program. Please tell everyone, who is Kevin Frederick and how did you get here?
Well, I am Kevin Frederick. I'm a retired Presbyterian minister. I served for 35 years, churches starting in Oxford, Mississippi, in East Tennessee, Western North Carolina, and have been in North Carolina for the past 22 years. I have been very much involved in our denomination in addressing domestic violence issues for the last almost 20 years, 18 years, and been on the leadership team for that. We've also, here locally, I've been involved in addressing the presence of Confederate flags on the interstate, as well as a monument in the downtown area to a Confederate soldier. So those are the kind of things that I am most passionate about, race relations as well as domestic violence issues.
Thank you, Kevin. And Reverend Stephen Dewitt, welcome to the program. Please tell everyone, who is Reverend Stephen and how did you get here?
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Dewitt. I'm a Franciscan friar and Catholic priest. I currently work at a soup kitchen in Philadelphia. I'm also completing a master's degree in social work at the University of Pennsylvania. I've been a friar for about 15 years now and involved in the Catholic Church since I was born. I grew up in Buffalo. I've lived in a few different parts of the country and spent some time in South America as well. In terms of background, before I came to Philadelphia, I worked in a parish for 5 years. I've been involved in my order's Peace and Justice Committee, what we call Justice, Peace, and the Integrity of Creation. And in terms of like interest and passion, I mean, what brings me to this conversation is an understanding of Christianity and the gospel as a real driving force for social justice and social change. And, that's something I think that we don't see and hear enough of.
Is it that we don't see and hear enough of it, or is it that we think we're providing social change when we're really not? Isn't that kind of the crux of the main question, or one of the main questions that I wanted to get to tonight, the difference between Christianity and evangelicalism? It seems to me, as a lifelong liberal, progressive Democrat, label me as you will, New Deal Democrat, Kennedy Democrat, label me as whatever you wish. I'm certainly in that category. It seems to me that evangelicals have the modern evangelical movement, especially starting around the late 70s, fully embraced by the Reagan coalition, or at least becoming part of the Reagan coalition, especially when he began to start giving public money to church faith-based organizations. Even deeper embraced by the George W. Bush campaigns and administrations, and then just kind of made a mockery of during the Trump regime. Aren't we dealing now with a large section of the faith community or the religious community, if not a large section, maybe large is the wrong word, a sizable section, that have wrapped themselves in Scripture while living nearly none of it, so far as I can see? Yet they think they're driving, well, they are driving social change, but it seems to me that it's not a Scripture-based or historical-based social change. Reverend Stephen, am I way off? Am I nowhere near? Might I even be lucky enough that you agree? Where do you find yourself there?
Well, broadly, you're correct that there's a large segment of the US population that identifies themselves as Christians, that I think other Christians wouldn't acknowledge as such. And I think for a lot of it, my own sense of it is that politics and religion have merged as identities for a lot of people. And so labels like evangelical for a lot of people have become synonymous with conservative or Republican, and not in and of themselves religious labels. And I think you see some of that in the Catholic Church as well, in certain segments of the Catholic Church. And I think it does real violence to what our faith teaches. And I want to be clear, I think Christianity has a lot to say about politics, but it should never simply be identified with one political party or movement.
Kevin, how about you? Is the premise of my program tonight, in which I guess it's a risk that might make it a very short program, am I wrong in my premise, even in your humble opinion? Is there a difference between Christianity as we have always known it and this politicized, aggressive, dare I say, evangelical movement, and especially the corporate conservative, certainly swimming in the fascist end of the pool now, Republican former political party. Is there a difference between the two things? Is my premise for us meeting here and having this program tonight correct in your mind?
Again, I would agree with Stephen that generally speaking, there are significant differences. However, in working in small towns over the last 20 plus years, I have recognized that there are some evangelicals that are engaged in social justice ministries, not as much, and not on the critical, really cutting edge issues that we face in our society, but they're engaged in soup kitchens and in variety of things that are that they make a difference, but they're not as critical in addressing the substantive issues of the day. And so, you know, I think that's where some of the mainline churches and parts of the Roman Catholic Church are willing to step into the deep waters and address those bigger issues. And one of the books that I've read recently that addresses this is Jamar Tisby's The Color of Compromise. And what he does in that book is look how Christianity has compromised itself to white supremacy over the eons, and how it has been justified in its approach to downplaying or going slow instead of addressing issues head on. And certainly the letter to Birmingham, of the Birmingham jail letter of Martin Luther King Jr. was one that addressed that issue very strongly in the South. And so I'm very familiar, having all my career served in the South, the difference, knowing the difference between political oriented, socially conservative churches and more liberal minded churches that are out there willing to get their hands dirty and address the tougher issues of our society. I think that's the defining difference between mainline and evangelical.
Let me, I don't want to rattle off a list of policy positions that I find flat out anti-Christian, to be blunt. And again, I by no means whatsoever am I an expert on Christianity. I'm not a theologian. I am not a member of the clergy. I'm not even a regular churchgoer, but the Almighty and I have discussions. We do have an open line of communication. I'm not always sure, whether I'm getting anywhere, but but I imagine that might even be a different topic for a different day. And I could risk shortening the program by rattling off a litany of policy positions that I find the evangelical movement diametrically opposed to the lessons of not just Christianity. I guess I have focused on Christianity too much because I am a Christian myself, but I think even against, that these evangelical political positions that are diametrically opposed to pretty much every major faith on the planet. The almost full adoption of the wealth doctrine, not welcoming immigrants and people who are in need, looking down on the unsheltered and the poor as somehow, rather than helping them, as somehow lazy. It was Christ that turned over the tables of the money changers, if I'm not mistaken. It was Christ that said, as you do to the least of us, you do unto me. And I could probably keep going and keep going and keep going, but I would boil it down to one story, and I'd just like you guys to just have at it. We're here for 3 to 4 hours, so you go. Well, you don't have to be here, but you know what I mean. We have airtime that long. I just want you. I'm reminded of a story that I think really encapsulates the difference between the two, and that was when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, Texas. And I've told this story on the air before, so if you're a regular listener, you've heard it. The city of Houston came to Joel Osteen and said, "We need your church for shelter." Now, Mr. Olstein's church, Mr. Olstein, by the way, if you Google it, you will get varying numbers, but he's worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 million. Not terribly Christian in my book, but he's worth about $500 million, billion with a B, 500 million. And even that estimate is somewhat up in the air as to whether that is correct or not. That said, came to him and said, we need your church for shelter. And he said, no. And when asked why, he said, because I don't want those people in my church. And it is that story that has stuck with me as the living embodiment, if you will, of the difference between evangelicalism and Christianity. The use of Christianity as a profit-making center and a place to proselytize political views from the pulpit. So I lay that story on the table to you, both gentlemen, as a Kickstarter, if you will, as to why I have wanted to do a program on this topic for so long. And we could probably speak another time as to why nobody else wanted to jump into it, but lucky you guys. But does anybody want to take that as a generator of why I wanted to do this program and just tell me what your experience, your education, your theology, or just as a simple Christian human being, what that story does or says to you?
Well, I guess I could speak first. And what your story speaks to for me is what I think is a particularly, not exclusively, but the particular heresy that we tend to see in U.S. Christianity, and that's the prosperity gospel, which, you know, as I presented, it's the basic idea that faithfulness equals success as the world defines it, you know, health, wealth, a good job, along those lines. And I call it a heresy because, I mean, for one thing, there's no place for the cross and in such a theology. But I think more deeply than that, you know, it prioritizes something that Jesus actively condemned, you know, in his life and in his ministry, and that's closeness to the poor and to the marginalized. I mean, when we look at the gospel stories, we don't see Jesus hanging out with King Herod. We don't see him interacting with Pontius Pilate until the very end, and it wasn't a social occasion. I mean,
if I could be so rude as interrupt you, could you please, or I could do it as I understand it, could you define for everybody what the prosperity doctrine even is?
Yeah, I would, the way I define it is it's the belief that, you know, faithfulness equals success. So the purer your belief, the stronger your belief in God, the more that translates into, you know, wealth and success. So a good job, lots of money, a nice house. And the flip side of that is that if you don't have those things, if you're poor or you're sick or whatever, then it's because you're simply not praying hard enough or you don't believe hard enough. And I don't know how to put it more strongly than call it a heresy, as a gross distortion of the gospel.
Kevin, do you see it? Do you define it the same way?
Very much so. I consider the prosperity gospel movement. There was a fella in Guatemala. I go down there almost once a year to do some work addressing domestic violence there. And there was a fella down there who was into the prosperity gospel, whose name literally is Cash Luna. And so this guy is raking in the money off of people who think if they serve God by giving to this church, that's getting wealthy off of these people, that God will hear their prayers and bless them with abundance of resources and good health, et cetera, to the point where even one of Osteen's stories that I heard about once was driving in a parking lot praying for the right place to open up so we wouldn't have to walk half a mile to the store. That's a true distortion of the gospel message, and the gospel message of redeeming the poor, redeeming the marginalized in society. And if the
Serving them, outright serving the poor,
absolutely,
helping them, lifting them up.
absolutely.
Praying for the right parking spot doesn't lift up anybody.
That's exactly right.
What about there's a political, shockingly, I found the political angle. But I'm glad you're all sitting down for that. I'm sure everybody's surprised Jeff found the political angle. There's a political angle to the prosperity doctrine, the wealth doctrine. I've heard different names for it that actually kind of goes back or can be traced back. While the doctrine itself is not essentially traced back to that, it kind of can be. That especially in a post-Roman Empire, post-plague Europe, the people that were left with the question of how do we know who should lead? And it was the wealthy that stepped into the breach and said, well, clearly we're the ones most blessed by God because we are as wealthy as we are. And naturally we should be the ones to lead. And the sort of medieval feudal, even coming out of the plague that we consider to be a Renaissance type time, a Renaissance era, still had a heavy feudalistic system built into it, that the rich landowners and the landed gentry and the serfs fought the battles, and the serfs took care of the fields, and the landowners reaped all the benefits and continued to claim that they must have been the ones that were most blessed. Does that part of the doctrine to you still exist? Are we still seeing that?
There are those groups that adhere to that. And even the whole notion of the king as the chosen representative of God, it epitomizes that hierarchical understanding that wealth is a defining category of God's blessing. It's there. I do want to make one distinction, though. I think there would be a number of evangelicals that would look at what's happening with the prosperity gospel and say, that's not us. Yes, it is part of an evangelical movement, but it's only a segment of the evangelical church. And so I don't want to just paint the brushstroke of prosperity gospel on all evangelicals, because they don't adhere to that. Many of them don't. But clearly you've got this sense with the prosperity gospel of trying to justify wealth and justify what we have as, I've got it because I'm better than somebody else, and God looks at me in that way. That's a load. It's a crock. It's not at all accurate in an understanding. Why would we serve a Christ who identifies with the most marginalized and who becomes himself the most marginalized in society to lift up those people? And clearly you mentioned before the Matthew 25, starting with verse 31 and 4 through 46, that particular story of the separation of those who serve the needs of the poor when we recognize them, and those who don't. And Jesus makes a clear distinction between those two groups. And we have a responsibility, a moral and ethical responsibility, to lift up and try to change not just the individual context of a person that's hungry, but the system that causes that person to be hungry. So it's a both and kind of approach. Yeah, we've got to have a handout for those individuals that need that hand that day, but we've also got to be working to change the structural problems in our society that cause those things to happen.
You mentioned something very important in there that I should have mentioned from the top of the program. We will be speaking in more broad stroke kind of terms, but in a nation of 330 million people and a planet of approaching 8 billion, there is no unanimity. So when I refer to the evangelical movement, obviously I cannot with any good conscience refer to every single person who identifies to be part of that movement. But I am speaking about the movement in a larger sense, and especially the movement as it has, in the forms that it has taken rather willingly and intentionally, especially since the Reagan era. So if there's anybody out there that considers themselves a deep evangelical, but not into, any of the political turns or depths that the broader evangelical movement has taken upon itself, well then, we're not talking about each and every individual. But Stephen, does the prosperity doctrine try to tell us that it actually is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle than for the rich man to go to heaven? Isn't that really what the basis of it is? And this assumption of leadership simply because the bank account has some more zeros than perhaps yours does?
Well, I think the prosperity gospel is definitely saying that, the rich man not only can pass through the eye of the needle, but he's got an express lane and a Mercedes-Benz driver to get him through there. And, as Kevin, I think, has said so wonderfully, I think that's that's just a distortion of what we believe. I mean, I'm a follower of, in particular, St. Francis of Assisi, who was the son of a wealthy merchant. He gave up all of the money he had to hang out with lepers in medieval Europe in the early 1200s. And to me, that's part of what attracted me to the story of St. Francis and to my order eventually, is just that, as I understand it, and that's the heart of the gospel. To come back to Matthew 25, one of the interesting things about that passage for me is it focuses so closely on the service and not on the worthiness or unworthiness of the people who are receiving it. So, for example, it doesn't say, blessed are you when you give me food, but only if you're a member of the right political party and speak in the right way or dress in the right way or come from the right kind of neighborhood. It's like, no, if you give food to a hungry person, you're in, and if you don't, you're out. And I think we can extrapolate from that to the need to ask the systemic questions. Why are people hungry? Why are they thirsty? That for me is the difference between charity and justice. And you need both of them to effectively live out the gospel. And wealth, I think, is always a barrier to that. This is one of St. Francis's key insights, is that the more things you have, the more possessions you have, the more you're concerned about protecting them and maintaining them and creating space to store them. And it makes it difficult to be generous. It makes it difficult to see someone who in greater need and give away something that makes you comfortable, but that for someone else would allow for their survival.
Jeff?
Go ahead, because I thought I knew my last question and it completely just flew right out. You may have even seen the smoke. I thought I had my next question all set up and it completely left my brain. Please, Kevin, go ahead.
One of the things that disturbs me, that I'm seeing out of the broad perspective of the evangelical movement, there is a redefining of masculinity these days. one of the things that I did with my curriculum in addressing domestic violence, because I sought to address men who are, in most of the cases, 85+% of the cases of domestic violence are male perpetrators. And what I'm seeing these days and reading about these days is that the far right group of Christians are redefining masculinity based on a higher level of machismo, a higher level of authoritarianism and control, and calling that Christ-like. Well, there is absolutely nothing I can read into that orientation that is Christ-like. Here's an example, just one of many out there, of how this far-right Christianity has become, they've adopted a political point of view and left the theology and left their integrity of their Christian faith behind in order to become political Christians. So that may be a real sharper definition of who we're trying to target here and address than just a broad stroke of evangelicals, because they're, you know, as I mentioned before, there's a wide range in that field.
When you look at the I also have to mention, Kevin, one of my good dear friends and loyal listeners, Ashley Shea, says in the comments on Facebook, I hear a Carolina accent, with a big smiley face, as she is from that region as well. So she's quite happy to hear a like accent this evening. Government, especially in the Reagan era, the Reagan campaign of 1980, not so much in 76, but a lot more in 80, really wrapped its hands around what was this burgeoning evangelical movement, the beginning of the evangelical movement, as they tried to cobble together a constituency and a majority constituency enough to win an election. Reagan, as governor, and even earlier on, was self-professed not a terribly religious man, didn't really give much thought to most social issues, didn't give much credence to the issues that folks of faith, of deep faith and religion, thought were important. But as he began to try to build a political coalition, dove in headfirst and actually established a religious office in the White House. In fact, it was George W. Bush, who would eventually become president, who was the head of that office, the White House's outreach to the religious community. This might be a bit too broad of a question. I hope it's not. And then, of course, when George W. Bush became president, he expanded that. They also did the faith-based initiatives where literal tax money was being handed to institutions, community service groups run by faith-based organizations. Was that a breach of the separation of church and state? Have we blurred that line so far now on the right between church and state that when in full power they are acting as one? I find it very difficult to understand as a person of faith or a person of deep religion to how you can look. And yes, I am targeting Republicans currently, and Democrats are not perfect people, God only knows. But this is a largely right-wing phenomena that we're looking at. I find it hard that folks of faith cannot or will not take that bit of a step back and see what's being done by the right-wing conservatives, fascist Republicans, fill in the blank, almost as an exploitative nature of folks' faith and religion. that was quite a long diatribe. I'm not even sure there was a question in there, but what, I mean, what, just gentlemen, generally speaking, whoever wants to jump up, what are your thoughts on that between this not full merger? I can't say it's a full merger, but the way Republicans have dove into the religious end of the pool, down to giving them money, making them part of this very cobbled together coalition of people. In fact, people within that coalition are diametrically opposed in the outcomes they want to see, which makes the coalition itself even more mystical to me. But what are your thoughts about how deeply Republicans have weighed into the religious end of the pool, the separation between church and state, and how good folks of faith maybe have even been manipulated into continuing to vote for it when they either will not or cannot take a step back and say, wait, there's nothing, this is actually anti my faith. Whoever wants it. That's a long question, sorry, but it's whoever wants it.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer or a constitutional scholar, so I can't say if it violates the constitutional definition of the separation of church and state, but I think it definitely is a breach of the moral definition. And what I think it reveals is that separation is good not only for the state, but for the church as well. And what I mean by that is I think one of Christianity's beliefs is that, power, worldly power, is inherently corrupting. And when you become, as a church, too closely aligned with worldly power, it twists your values, it twists your understanding of the gospel into something that's no longer recognizable. And I think that's, what you've been describing, Jeff, is just the way in which too close of alliance between a segment of the church and a political movement, has corrupted the church and, stymied its ability to offer a true witness to the gospel. And I think the end result, is what you described, is that a lot of people who might otherwise be receptive to what I think is the real core message of Christianity are turned off, because when they think Christian, they think, of a certain kind of evangelical we've been talking about today. And you see this in the Catholic Church as well, too. I think of the way in which many leaders in the Catholic Church have been very closely associated with anti-abortion politics, and the way in which that, for many people, has become synonymous with Catholic. And that's, again, unfortunate. I think it's a mild way to describe it, because that's really a small part of what the Catholic Church and the wider Christian tradition has to teach. And in a moment, where we see the widening separation between the very wealthy and everybody else, when we see the way in which that concentration of wealth fuels a lifestyle in the Western world that's destroying the planet, I think there's a lot that Christianity has to say to the situation that's being drowned out by these bad presentations, these bad understandings of what Christianity is about and what it has to offer the world and this country.
Kevin?
Yeah, let me give an example that is one that I've seen play out for months now, almost 2 years. And that is the difference between how the evangelical politically minded church has responded to COVID and how other churches have responded to COVID. What we heard early on is it's a fraud, it's a fake, it's not, and so that first wave of information, you had people going to church and having mass infections going on in their churches because they were being fed a line, both politically and by their pastors in many cases, that said all of this is fake and fraud, and yet they were dying as a result, or they were getting terribly sick and having huge medical bills and a body that didn't function the way it used to. And you have this playing out. Most recently, several months ago, a local lawyer that works for a school system asked me to respond to a letter that this individual had gotten that was trying to write a letter to the school system justifying the fact that they didn't want their children immunized, and they did not want them to be exposed to the kind of teaching that was asking for masks, et cetera, et cetera. And so I wrote back and pointed out some things that were very much a Christian kind of response based on how Christ looked out for the other person. Christ didn't make the other person risk their health because of a political position. And I think making that point, I did it in the local newspaper, wrote a letter to the editor and to that regard, and said there is no moral justification for that the church can offer to not get vaccinated or to not be wearing masks in public. It's just, there's no just moral justification for that. It is a matter of caring for your neighbor, which is a very much a Judeo-Christian concept. And broader than that, the Muslims also agree with that same principle. So why we see this distortion of Christian principles to undergird a political position, that's where we're seeing this happen over and over again with a number of different issues in our society, and it's what keeps me awake at times thinking about the implications of all this.
Let me see if I can follow up on that. It's funny. I rarely feel out of my depth on this program. This is definitely the one program where I am out of my depth. I'm overwhelmed by the intellectualism that is in this room, and it's not mine. Let me just be blunt with that. But let me see if I can follow that point, Kevin. I usually use the example of, when the press goes to a somewhere in the South or in the Midwest after a tornado or something like that, and you'll see folks who didn't have a heck of a lot to start with standing in front of a pile of ruin behind them, and then say, well, we just thank God that we're alive.
Yeah.
Okay, so do I. But who the hell sent the tornado? If you were a person of that deep of faith, it would seem to me. Isn't COVID somewhat the same thing? And I can't intellectualize, I cannot rationalize the disparity of that opinion. If God didn't want you to take the vaccine, why did he send the disease? What am I missing? Or am I oversimplifying it? Am I making it terribly oversimplified? But then again, didn't God give us the intellectual capacity to make the vaccine in the first place? What it seems to me like a recycling symbol of an argument where it just begins to feed and spin on itself. I thank God I survived the tornado. It took everything I had, which wasn't a hell of a lot to start with, but thank God I'm alive. But didn't God send the tornado? What am I missing? What is it from a theological standpoint, or from a, whatever the proper term is, I guess, a deeper faith or deeper religion point of view? How do you rationalize those things that seem to me to completely miss each other? How does one rationalize that?
I'll start on that one. What's your...
Or does my question even make sense?
The
I mean, maybe I'm
theological
not.
term there, Jeff, that addresses that is called theodicy. It's the problem of evil. and so you're faced with a question. It's a question of Job. It's a question of all his friends. What causes evil? I think mainline Christians would say evil is a result of a world that's set in its motion, and it's a result of human action, but it is not targeted. At least my understanding of God is that God does not target evil onto individual lives for a purpose, a redeeming purpose. Well, you know, what I would face that the other way and say the redeeming element is the assurance that we're not alone when that kind of stuff happens. I have had to address from the pulpit in peoples who have died in accidents and at the youth of their age. And how do you address that from the pulpit? If you're going to say it's caused by God, then you've distorted an understanding of the nature of God, as well as you're distorting that person's worth by trying to attribute that as a God thing, that it happened because God said, your time is up. I always have, I shudder when I hear that. Well, when it's my time, it's my time. Well, you know, I'm going to do everything I can to get my shots, to get the booster, to stay as healthy as I can so that I will fulfill my time. But I'm not going to tempt fate by saying my time is in God's hands and I'm not going to take the shot. I mean, that's fatalistic thinking.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, what do you think of oh, I'm sorry, Kevin. I'm sorry. I jumped you. Sorry.
The main thing that I think for us as human beings is to live by faith means that we do everything possible within the realm of our capabilities to advance the cause, advance ourselves, you know, whatever. But we also recognize there are forces of life that are at work that we have no control over. And we have faith to move, to say, I'm willing to make the next step, even despite all that. You know, yeah, I may get hit by a truck tomorrow, but I'm not going to spend tonight worrying myself to death because tomorrow I may meet my maker. I don't know. It's just, that's not living your life with integrity and faith, in my opinion.
Stephen?
Yeah, I would add to that, at the risk of getting too deeply theological here, I would say it's appropriate to understand, you know, the problem of evil as the price we pay for free will, in that for free will to truly mean something, we have to be able to choose against God. And, you know, in the Christian tradition, you know, what the story of Adam and Eve says is that many Christian traditions, we consider that a holy myth, I think would be a good way to describe it. It's meant to teach us something, but it's not literal history. And the point it's making is that creation was intended to be good, but because human beings somewhere early on in our history chose against God, imperfection entered the world, and it's become a characteristic of creation, such that we see things like tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes and other so-called, and I hate this term, acts of God. And I think, you know, that's correct. It's become a general condition. And, you know, Kevin is very correct when he says that what our response to that, and when I was doing parish work, I gave homilies at funerals for people who died in tragic circumstances. And often where I'd go would be the Book of Lamentations and the Gospel of John, where you see Jesus, in particular the Gospel of John, where you see Jesus consoling Martha and Mary at the death of Lazarus and saying to them, you know, I'm here. And I think that's often the message, is to people who are suffering, God is with you, Jesus is with you, particularly in a powerful way, which is not to say we should seek suffering to connect with Jesus. That's been a tendency that Christianity's had to fight on occasion as well. But I think that's the basic attitude and orientation I take. And in terms of things like vaccines and COVID, particularly, what I would say there is that, failing to get vaccinated is a selfish choice. Because when we live in a society where we interact with other people, our actions don't just affect ourselves, they affect other people. And so a decision not to get vaccinated, unless you're going to totally isolate yourself from human contact, it creates a situation where, it's not just about you. Your choice not to get vaccinated could lead you to pass on the virus to someone, even if, and I've heard this argument, I'm young, I'm healthy, doesn't matter if I get COVID, I'll be fine. It's like, well, you may be fine, but are your elderly parents fine? Is the elderly people you may meet at church on Sunday, are they going to be fine if you pass it on to them? And I think that's where the selfishness comes in. It's like, you're thinking only about yourself and that again is anti-Christian. Love for others, even to the point of sacrificing one's own health and well-being, one's own life, is at the heart of Christianity. But it's not sacrificing for our health or our comfort. That sacrifice is only meritorious when it's for other people and for their sake.
Like a true professional who speaks quite often, Stephen did me quite a favor, stopped right at the top of the hour when I'm supposed to be resetting the program because I skipped my bottom of the hour reset. So now I'm going to do it when I was supposed to. You are listening and watching to The Kennedy Effect, and we are back with you live. We are thrilled to be back with you after a 2-week health-imposed hiatus. Very honored, very humbled to be back here with you. We've had an active chat here on Facebook. Lots of comments to be put in there. I will try to scroll back and get to your comments. I know I have missed a bunch, but one thing that a good host and presenter should know is when to shut up, step back, and let the smart people talk. So that is exactly what we are doing here today, letting the smart folks talk. If you have questions, please put them in the chat here at our home group Facebook page, That Other Side of Information, That Other Side of Information, wherever you might be watching across the Facebook universe. We regularly, he said, try to share, we share the show and the show announcements about 100 different places across Facebook. I think our first show we shared to maybe a dozen. That is now around 100 or even more. Stay where you are, continue to listen, watch. It's great. We are just thrilled that you are with us. We would not have a program without you. However, if you would like to take part in the comments and questions, come to our home group Facebook page. You will see the show right there at the top. Tap on it. It fills your screen. There's the comments. You can type away and be part of the program. To our friends and family at hot101.net, thanks for being with us and thanks for welcoming me back to the airwaves again after a little bit of some health issues. If you don't know how to listen to hot101.net, you need to and you should be. It is tremendous, terribly, terribly, wonderfully, wonderfully talented people on hot101.net. And some more programming birthed from this program will be coming your way very, very soon, but we'll talk about that as we move forward. Hot101.net, the name is the web address, hot101.net. If you have an Apple device, go to the Apple App Store. You can get the hot101.net app there. If you have an Android device, go to the Google Play Store. You can get the app for your device there. Or if you have some other type of device, like an LG or something like that, you can go to the TuneIn radio app, go up to the search bar, search for hot101.net, and you will find us there. And of course, it's time to play America's new favorite game show, Can Jeff Trigger Alexa? You can now tell Alexa to play hot101.net. And when somebody finally gets to me and says, you turned on my Alexa, I'm going to be really, really self-satisfied in a very childish and giddy way that I triggered your Alexa, because I'm a spoiled little brat and I think it's funny. So I'm going to be very, very pleased with myself when I do that. You can say, hey, Alexa, play hot101.net. And to our friends and family at TCP, we have missed you as well. We are glad to be back with you again for our live program. Please also remember, if you have a product or service that you want to advertise, this is the best place to do it. We have 0 advertisers. The entire budget of this program comes out of my pocket. But if you wanted to advertise here and literally reach a global audience, you can do that. Just contact us, give us an email, drop something on a Facebook chat. It's okay. It's safe. I promise. Progressive people buy products too. You can do that right here. If you miss any of the program live, you can go to our YouTube channel. I think that's probably the best place to go, even though we do share the program onto Twitter and onto LinkedIn and onto Instagram. Our YouTube channel, which is also called That Other Side of Information. See a theme here, kids? We try to name everything the same thing so you can remember it. It is a repository. It's our library. All of our episodes are there. You can find out everything that we've ever done. It's right there at our YouTube channel, That Other Side of Information. And besides, if you, I have continually had to cut George's pay for the program. I believe he is now at a quadruple -0. He was making 0, then I had to cut it to 0, then we had to cut it again to 0, and I think it's still at 0. So advertise on the program, and I promise I will send George a shiny nickel for being the technical producer and my friend of 20 years for this program. I'll throw him a nickel, I promise. But let's get back to our guests, and I will open up the phone line a little later in the program. But let's get back to our very smart people, the smart guests that have been kind enough to join us again, Stephen Dewitt and Kevin Frederick. Gentlemen, as you have devoted your lives to this, to your faith, to your religion, to helping others in the most Christian way possible, in my humble opinion, when you run into that one person at the restaurant or the grocery store who tries to tell you what the religion means, because I'm sure we've all run into them, just the way I am consistently challenged and approached on various platforms as folks try to explain to me what democracy is. I would assume that you've run into somebody in your path, and maybe not, maybe it's a dumb question, to try to explain to you what your faith is and what it means. My faith doesn't mean I have to welcome immigrants across the border. It doesn't mean I have to, let the poor pick themselves up by their bootstraps, even though they don't have boots. Has that happened to you? How do you have these type of discussions become more frequent in your life as we've moved past 1980? Or am I off base? Am I working from a sad assumption? Tell me about, when you get, or if you get involved in these debates, so to speak, these mixture of political and religious debates.
Well, it's not just people that are on the far right that raise the issues and challenge your faith. As a minister who was in the pulpit every week, to find challenges coming even from within your own congregation of people who have a strong political feeling about an issue, and you've crossed that line. The challenge is, and sometimes I've done it well, sometimes I haven't, but my goal has always been, how do I preserve the relationship beyond this issue? Because they are a member of the church I serve. They are as much a part of this community as someone else. And if I'm only open to people of similar perspectives as mine, then that compromises my role as a pastor to a group of people that were there when I came and will be there when I leave. And that's where it's been hardest for me, Jeff. It's with people I know who strongly disagree with me on a political issue or something that I've said from the pulpit that addresses whether it's Black Lives Matter, which I got a lot of pushback on when I was addressing, or some other issues that come up from time to time. Being able to say, all right, here's my opinion. Here is my theological assessment of a situation based on my professional skills and what I have learned. And I'll hear your side, but I'm not going to be defined by your side.
Stephen, a question that came in through the chat, and I try to get to them as much as I can. And I missed a lot of comments, folks. I apologize. They've scrolled past me and I've lost them. Please keep your questions and comments coming. But again, the good host usually knows when to shut up and step back, which is exactly what I've tried to do here tonight. But let me ask you a question, Stephen. From Ashley, responding to Christian nationalists saying their behavior is biblically immoral doesn't change their behavior. Instead, they tend to dig their heels in even deeper. Have either of you, I'm starting with Stephen, but have either of you been successful in changing a COVID denier's point of view to another point of view, or led them away from the fascism that has become the modern Republican movement? I usually don't call them the Republican Party. I think they're a former political party. I think they're a non-functioning political party. It seems to be all they care about now is low taxes and wealth and profits and so on and so on and so on. A discussion we could possibly have later in the program. But have either of you been successful in these, I don't want to say confrontational discussions, but confronting the denial of either something, I don't want to say as small as COVID denial, but one thing is COVID denial, or even the greater view of, these things that you are supporting, espousing, voting for they're simply not in line with Scripture. Have either of you been successful in those types of, I'll start with Stephen, but have either of you been successful in those conversations?
Well, in terms of COVID, not to my knowledge. I left parish work before COVID hit, but I had I think a similar experience to what Kevin was saying, where you preach on social justice, you often get a lot of pushback. People are fine with charity. It's when you start asking the why question that you can often get in trouble. And I think I had some success in talking about those issues. And I think the approach I've found most successful, and not a guarantee, but most successful, is when someone comes at me and says, how can you believe this, etc. My first instinct is always, well, why do you believe what you believe? And I'm looking for I'm looking for a deeper understanding of their point of view, but I'm also looking for something in their thoughts or reasoning that I can identify with and say, and kind of help to expand their thinking and to expand the way they understand the issue. And I try and remember always that, my job as a minister is not just to, and I think Evan, you were saying this too, it's not just to minister to the people who agree with me or like me, it's to minister to everybody, particularly when you have a church and you're working in that context, but even more broadly than that. And if someone believes something I believe to be wrong, my job in that case is to try and convert them and try and shift their thinking. So I don't know, again, how broadly successful I've been. I know one or two cases on other issues unrelated to COVID where I've had some success with individual people. But I think the best way to go about it really is to try and at least start from some kind of common ground and work from there.
How about you, Kevin?
Well, an example, Jeff, I have a brother who's gay, and he and I were roommates when we were children. I knew him really well and loved him always. When he came out to me, I was 25, and he told me that he was gay, and then I was the first person in the family. Others were following, and my parents really stepped up, and they learned about. They went to counseling with him, and in an affirming atmosphere, not in one of the reparative therapy approaches of, we're trying to get the gay out of you, but in an affirming relationship with a counselor that helped him to see this is who he is, and helped my parents understand that. That I say all that to say that there have been times in the churches I've served where family members have come out as being gay, and I've gone to work with other family members who were not as accepting. One grandfather that I helped a great deal just by sharing my story and sharing my parents' story and how they came around, and it took them some time to do that. But I saw where this individual really opened himself up. I said, the thing is, your grandson is still your grandson. You've loved him from the time he was born. You still love him. Allow yourself to love him. That doesn't resolve the bigger theological issues and struggles that he was having, but it gave him an entry point in being able to be present in a way he already knew how to do. And sometimes for me, it's a matter of showing a path that person is already on to give them a step further into their development as a human being, to be more open to a truth of in this case, a truth of love, and a truth of the value of the identity of each individual person, as a way towards taking the next step. To make the assumption that what I tell you is going to convert you and everything's going to be hunky-dory after that. We are human beings, complex individuals. We take slow and steady steps in the process of our own growth. And as a minister, helping people take the next step has often been what I've tried to do. And it's a slow process. And some people say, that's not fast enough. That's one of the issues that I struggle with sometimes with the far left, is demand for change now, no yesterday. And yet, yeah, we need to be changing, but how do we get a society to make that shift and change? It's not going to be overnight. And so helping them to make a next step in their journey of life is a lot of what I think a good minister is supposed to be doing.
Stephen, how huge of a step was it? I'm a big fan of this Pope, which probably sounds like a very silly and kind of small statement, but I'm a fan of this Pope. And from opening rooms in the Vatican to the unsheltered, opening showers and toilets to them, if not allowing them to stay, the reorienting of Vatican banking, an admission that the child abuse scandals were not handled well and have not been handled well and need to be handled better, all the way to one of my favorite stories. I think I mentioned it to you when we were on the phone. Really one of my favorite stories, if not the favorite story. these were two separate occasions. Let me be clear about that. When Benedict was still Pope, he met Child as they, drive around St. Peter's Square and meet folks, and a Child had asked him, about a pet of his that had passed, and said, "Will I see him again?" And Benedict said, "Of course you won't. They don't have souls." Francis becomes Pope and meets a Child, father and son. They happen to be from Brazil, for whatever that's worth. And the father kind of lurches the Child forward. Francis sees him because the Child is weeping heavily and says, "What is bothering you?" I'm paraphrasing, of course, the actual dialogue, and says, "What is bothering you?" And the Child says, "My dog just died and I miss him very, very much. Am I ever going to see him again?" And the Pope says, "Of course you will, because he loved you and because you loved him. And that's the basis of all of it, is love. He's in a better place and he'll be waiting for you when you reach that place too." And to me, that signals such a big change in the church. And I use that story, and I get choked up every time I think about it, because I've lost more furry family members than I care to count. And I hope they're waiting. I hope I get there. I hope they're waiting. But, and his admission, I think it was just in a simple little Q&A when they were flying between destinations, about the power of the word judgment, when he was asked about LGBTQIA folks, and said, who am I to judge them? Whatever previous stands the Catholic Church has made, and some were outright draconian, to have a Pope sit there and say, who am I to judge these people? How much has judgment? It seems to me that in this evangelical movement, this right-wing evangelical movement, this prosperity doctrine evangelical movement, that judgment has become a very big part of it. Oh, you're poor. You're gay. You're an immigrant. You're a person of color. You're a woman. Almost anything other than white male landowner, to go back to the medieval that we mentioned earlier. How much has judgment, Stephen, become this overwhelming weight upon the evangelical movement? It just seems to me to be an extremely judgment-laden movement, which is antithetical to Scripture.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think, that heavy emphasis on judgment, to me, speaks of primarily of fear, and a desire for certainty, fear of what the fate of my soul is, fear of what the world is becoming, fear of losing what little I may have or what I have, and a desire to first blame somebody, but also to know that I'm not that person, that my salvation, my sanctity is assured. And judgment is just it's part of the Christian tradition, but it's not the leading edge of it. And I think the stories you were telling about Pope Francis, speaks to the difference between a faith and an approach to how that faith is expressed publicly that focuses more on pastoral accompaniment than judgment. And I think it's interesting that Pope Francis hasn't really changed any fundamental beliefs, doctrines, or teachings of the Catholic Church during his papacy. What he has done is he's changed the emphasis and he's changed the manner in which he models what it means to be the universal pastor of our church. And that's, again, I come back to that word accompaniment, that our first job is to walk with people and to recognize that ultimately judgment is God's job, not ours. Our job is to struggle and fail and get it back up and walk and struggle some more, and learning to live the gospel and to love others. And that's a matter, I think, again, of it's a need to walk with people.
Let me just drill down on that real quickly and kind of rephrase what you just said to make sure that I have it correct, and then hopefully the audience does too. Pope Francis has not issued any lengthy reinterpretations of doctrine or rewritten policies of the church. I'm blanking on the name of when popes write the blanking on it, but
Missives.
right, yeah, missive is one. I seem to have another name that I'm
Encyclical,
missing.
probably.
Thank you, probably, yes. But he's not done those, but yet somehow has still seemed to change the public faith or face of the Catholic Church itself. I tend to look at Pope Francis, especially if not all popes, as kind of and I know some of my friends of different denominations really despise my view of this, but I tend to look at Pope Francis as the titular leader of the Christian movement, not just the Catholic Church itself. But am I restating, probably in a very clumsy way, what you just mentioned, that he really hasn't written these long papers or literally changed church law, so to speak, but yet really has changed the face of the Catholic Church to a softer, just more open, more understanding, maybe even more Christian, more, and in an odd way, maybe even more in line with Scripture than it was. Am I restating that the right way? Do you see it that way?
I think you're close. I mean, the minor correction is, the Pope Francis has written several encyclicals, but in those encyclicals, he hasn't changed any dogmatic beliefs of the church or anything that we would consider fundamental or at the core of what we believe. But you're correct, I think, when you say that a lot of what he's done is about how he's represented what we've always believed, and again, move the emphasis from judgment, and you could call it, I think, a mindset that sees the church and the world as kind of, hostile opponents who are always kind of pitted against each other, to one where the church is part of the world and Christians need to be actively involved in the world, working with others, to build the kind of world that God wants to see. And that's certainly the image of the church he has. I mean, he talks about, and I forget exactly where, but he's talked about how he wants the church to be a field hospital for sinners. He wants the pastors in the church to have the smell of the sheep. And what he means by that is really he wants the ministers to walk with people and share their struggles and help, and not to, I'll give you one more, this isn't a quote from Pope Francis, it's something I remember from my time in the seminary, but I think it's something the Pope would endorse, is that, ultimately our job as ministers is not to be people's conscience, it's to help form their conscience and to support them in that, but not to tell them what to do.
Kevin, do you see this Pope in that way, as more of kind of open arms and moving away from judgment, and that, again, that heaviness, that I'm kind of groping for words here, never good for the radio host to be groping for words, but that weight, kind of lifting that weight, so to speak, kind of opening the doors, opening the windows, airing the place out, so to speak. And
let me share with you a story that I'm very, very familiar with. I served a church that's called the Waldensian Presbyterian Church. Waldensians were a group that started in 11 1876, and their leader by the name of Valdo or Valdez what believed in preaching on the street corner. He had been a Catholic, Roman Catholic, and had been involved in the leadership of the Roman Catholic Church, and he sought permission at that point to preach from the street corner. Well, what happened was over the next 20 to 30 years, the Roman Catholic Church was very threatened by this man preaching, and other people started preaching on street corners and following that, men and women preaching. And so within 20 years, the Catholic Church branded the Waldensians as excommunicated first, and then branded as heretics in the early 13th century. There were 33 separate persecutions of the Waldensians down through history that happened even after the Reformation. Up until 2015, no Roman Catholic Pope had ever acknowledged the legitimacy of the Christian movement of the Waldensians. This Pope did, and did so publicly in a Waldensian church, and called the Waldensians brothers and sisters in the faith, and vowed a new day, asked for forgiveness. The Pope asked for forgiveness from the Waldensians. And the Waldensians then wrestled with this. And I happened to be in Italy that fall when, in late August, when they met together and said, how do we respond to the Pope? And there was great debate over this, what is an appropriate response to an apology made for travesties and injustices that were done hundreds of years prior. And what I was really struck by the response of this community of faith, in which they said, we cannot accept an apology for something that did not happen to us. But what we hear from the Pope is a willingness to begin anew. And so we embrace the Pope as a brother Christian, as he has done with us, who is willing to work side by side in a Christian witness that is more loving and forgiving and more open to the needs of people. That's the kind of impact this Pope has had, and I have been a huge fan of his ever since he came on board. But that particular event, I mean, as I watched that service that day, I had tears in my eyes. I was just streaming with just gratitude that after 850 years, the Catholic Church said, I'm sorry, and we're able to move on as a unified Christian witness. I see that as a sign of great hope and great joy.
6:32 Eastern Time. This is the Kennedy Effect. We have returned. We are back from, that would be a bad week for me to say that we're back from the dead. We're back from illness. I was going to make a joke, and it was a dumb joke. Let's just skip right over that. Even now and then the host has a brain cramp and is going to say things he thinks are funny and they're not. But we are back from illness. Anyway, we are live with you the 6th of February. This is the Kennedy Effect, wherever you might be on Facebook. That other side of information is our home group page, or please feel free to stay where you are. We are very, very grateful to every group and every page and every single individual that takes in our program. YouTube is the best place to see the recorded versions. And of course, the recorded versions live on everywhere that they have been shared on Facebook. We're also on Instagram, LinkedIn, Patreon, and even TikTok. Not a big fan of that, but I'm there. Hot101.net, Apple App Store, Google Play Store. Tell Alexa to play it. And of course, TCP as well. Before I open the phones, there's a very basic question that I probably should have asked earlier, or potentially even started the program with. Isn't the Christian doctrine, the New Testament, Christ's teachings in and of themselves, aren't they really also teachings of justice? Whom did Christ cast out? No one. Christ and his disciples lived communally. If one made money, they threw it in the bucket. If one obtained bread, it went into the communal pot, so to speak. Isn't the Christian faith a justice faith?
Absolutely. And I would point to, in support of that, I would point to the fact that the only times that we see Jesus angry in the Gospels is in the face of hypocrisy and cruelty. And in particular, I think, Kevin, you mentioned this earlier, or maybe Jeff, I can't remember now, but someone mentioned when he overturned the money changers' tables in the temple. And I think there's a very good argument to be made that that was the act that got him crucified. Because not only was he wandering around preaching, he was challenging a source of money for the temple infrastructure. He was challenging powerful people who benefited. And that's, I think, been the fate of many, many people over the years who've challenged people of power and influence, but also cruelty and oppression is they often end up dead. And I don't know how else to put it.
Stephen, isn't that one of the great hypocrisies or great ironies of this prosperity doctrine? If we listen to what you just said, that it is your belief, your study of Scripture, that it was Jesus overturning the tables of the money changers in the temple, by the way, not just out in the street somewhere, but in the temple, that was really the thing that put him over the edge. Not even the doctrine he was preaching, or I shouldn't say doctrine, but the ideals that the values that he was preaching. It's taking on people's pockets, economic power. Don't touch my money. That's my money, not your money. Isn't that one of the great ironies of this prosperity doctrine and the evangelicals who have been sucked in by it? Jesus himself turned over the tables of the money changers, and yet you've based so much of what you call your own faith on wealth and money, and the people that have it must be better than me, and the people who have none must just be terrible people. It's so antithetical to that story. I'm blown away by it. What do you believe?
Oh, I agree completely. And the other thing I would point to is the lesser known version of the Beatitudes in Luke's gospel drops the in spirit part. Matthew says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Luke says, blessed are the poor. And I think, that too speaks of the value that God places on simplicity, on simple living, on sharing of what we have with others. And, again, seeking to build a world where everyone has at least the minimum they need to live with dignity.
Isn't that one of the great lost lessons and I think I may have two separate occasions conflated in my brain. I want to say it's the Sermon on the Mount, but when Christ instructs the disciples to feed everyone, and so they can't, there's only 2 loaves of bread left and a fish, and says, go. And I might be conflating the 2 occasions, but isn't that really the ultimate maybe parable or story of giving, of selflessness, we consider it a miracle story, but it isn't perhaps the more basic lesson one of, I give you all I have. The miracle creates more than we had, but even the little bit that I did have, I give to you.
And in doing so, we all benefit. And I think the important question with that parable is, what actually was the miracle? Was the miracle that Jesus created a magic basket that every time you pulled a loaf of bread out, another one appeared? Or was the miracle is that through his actions, Jesus inspired everyone who was there who, had a half a loaf of bread in their pocket or a little bit of this, that everyone started pulling out what they had. And it turned out there was already enough there. It was just a matter of getting people to start sharing it.
And here's a critical issue, Jeff, that goes along with that. Stephen, I don't want to cut you off. But the critical issue is a theology of scarcity as opposed to a theology of abundance. And what we're hearing oftentimes from the right wing is a theology of scarcity. We can't let you in this country because you're going to ruin it for us. There's not enough room here for you. Wait a minute. We underrate the value of and the potential of this great nation by saying we're by operating from a theology of scarcity. When what Jesus does in that situation, he says, bring what you got. It's enough, especially if you're giving it over to God. It is enough. God will provide with what you have. That's a theology of abundance. And that is a critical difference between what we're hearing from pulpits these days. Either you're hearing a theology of abundance, which is God's love is there for you and it's also there for your neighbor, or we're hearing a theology of scarcity. God loves you because you are faithful to God, and to hell with the rest of those people out there because they're going to hell. That's a scarcity gospel.
Why aren't well, first off, I feel like we've spent as much time tonight talking about hypocrisy as we've talked about anything else. Doesn't anybody see the hypocrisy of the argument that you just made? The prosperity doctrine says, well, the wealthiest are the ones most blessed by God, but they are also the ones telling us you can't have any, and we don't have any, so we sure as hell can't share it with anybody else.
There you go.
But even with that, and I know I asked this question earlier, I'm to break into the old Irish, I'm gobsmacked at the fact that folks can't or won't take that step back and say, wait a second here. Wait a minute. Something's not right here. The word and the actions are not the same. They're not coming from the same place. They are not being lived out in the same way. This isn't me. Or this TV preacher telling me, God really wants me to have that private jet, but I need your help to get it. While billions starve. The three richest people in this country, three people. Regular listeners are turning away now because I say this every week. Three richest people in the country have as much wealth as the bottom 220 million. The 400 richest people on the planet have as much wealth as the bottom 2/3. The three richest people in the country, sorry, I take that back. The 660 billionaires that we have in this country, and we didn't have a billionaire in this country until the 70s. We now have 660 of them. Increased their wealth by $1.5 trillion during a pandemic. How on earth do you go into a mega church on a Sunday and say, this is all great? I'm going to drop $5 I don't have into the bucket. I'm mystified by it. I know I asked this question earlier, but do either of you have an insight as to why the hell this connection is not being made? How are these synapses not firing from the left to the right side and making sense of it?
Because it's a spiritual blanket. It protects them from reality. It shields them from the needs of people that are desperate. And it tells them they don't have to be aware or responsive to those needs.
Is it like an excuse, you would say, Stephen, Kevin, like an excuse? Like it's okay to look away, that kind of thing?
Yes. And I think because, again, remember with the prosperity gospel, because success and wealth is a product of faith and devotion, that means that you are morally responsible for whether or not you have it. So the argument I think that's being made is that you don't have to care about those other people because they're poor, they're sick, they're homeless, because it's their fault. If they were more faithful, more devoted, if they were in some cases Christian at all, then they'd be okay. And the fact that they're not that is why they're in trouble. And why, so I think it's comforting. I agree with Kevin that it's comforting, but it's comforting in that sense. It tells people that, you know, it's their fault and you can avoid it. Send that $5. The phrase I used to describe this in a homily recently, not this exactly, but you know, things related to what we're talking about, is moral obscenity. And I think I stand by that phrase, is that, you know, it's a moral obscenity that these kind of wealth disparities exist, and that there are people out there who, in the name of the gospel, try and rationalize that and promote it and make it okay. It's one of the few things that, if you let me talk too long, I will start getting angry. Is
it a lack of values, a lack of faith, a lack of understanding, or is it a twisting of those values, those ideals? I talk a lot on this program, the difference between ideas and ideals. For me, as imperfect as we are, and we are, it's the ideals of the Democratic Party that people should be. We want you to do radically crazy things like eat, keep a roof over your head, go to a school, have a school building that doesn't kill you, have people carrying guns that don't kill you, that 3 people shouldn't have the wealth of 220 million when there's 330 million of us in the country. Those are ideals, not just an idea. We want you to be able to see a doctor. Those are values. Republicans don't have a monopoly, which I use the word intentionally. They don't have a monopoly on patriotism. They don't have a monopoly on values. Those are values. We'd like you to see a doctor. We want you to see a doctor. We want your bridges not to collapse. We'd like you to be able to go to college. Hell, we'd like you to be able to afford to have a child in the first place. The American population is not replacing itself. Even immigrant populations are not replacing themselves because they can't afford it. So are these a lack of ideals and values or a twisting of ideals and values?
I think the latter is the response. It is a twisting, because certainly there are values there that are highly espoused and held by many of those individuals. But if it is a me-centered focus, then it is a distortion of the truth.
I didn't get to ask you, Kevin, isn't where we started the half hour. Is Christianity a justice-based set of values? The same as I asked Stephen before I twisted us off on this branch, but I mean, is Christianity, or and all the major religions, I think, for that matter. I'm not obviously as well schooled in the others as a Christian person myself. I'm just simply not. I should know more about other faiths because it binds us together when we learn about other folks' faith. But I'm certainly no expert on them. But is it Christianity in and of itself a justice set of values?
It is. It is very much so. And, you know, again, I'll go back to that Matthew 25. I mean, that is a definitive sermon of Jesus that he says, you know, it's how you treat the poor. It's how you treat those that are thirsty, those that are naked, those that are sick, those that are in prison. All of those individuals, how you relate to them depends upon your relationship to God. That's basically what that passage says. Am I right, Stephen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, how can you distort an understanding of God if it's just me and Jesus or me and God? And you know, so much of what we hear is me and God, me and Jesus. Well, yeah, well, that's an important dimension of it, but it's not the whole story. It has to be an inclusion: love God, love your neighbor as yourself, the two great commandments, both for Jews as well as for Christians. And some of those principles can be found, love God and love your neighbor is also an underlying principle within Islam. And, you know, how we've distorted that, and we all three religions have seen distortions of its own truth, but all three have those central tenets at the core of their being.
Yeah, I'm thinking here of a passage. I think it's from the letter of James, but I'm not remembering for sure, that where he has a line, might be one of the letters of John, but I think it's James, where he says, you know, those of you who cannot love the brother or sister you can see will
Right.
never love the God that you cannot.
That's James.
Because, and it comes back to what you said, that great commandment is the way in which we love God is by loving our neighbor. I think, again, one of the lessons that St. Francis taught his followers is that what he taught us is that if you want to love God, you look for the most hated, marginalized, ostracized person you can find. In his day, those were lepers who were exiled outside the medieval town. And you go find them and you embrace them. You want to find Christ, you want to know Christ, that's what you do. I mean, Francis's great conversion was when he was on a road, he was returning to Assisi, and he was approached by a leper, and he was moved to embrace the leper. That was one of the moments that changed his life. And I think that's the message we need to really preach more of, is you want to know Christ, you want to know God. You know, find the poor person, find the immigrant, find the trans person who's been kicked out of their school or being bullied. And those are the people you stand with and you embrace and tell them, you know, we're with you. I mean, if we preached more of that gospel, I think we would probably be leading a modern day revival in this country.
Have we as Christians done, let me back up, put it this way. Americans I'm blessed to have dear friends, probably my best mate on the planet, from other countries, specifically Europe, or mostly Europe. And I remember having a conversation with him about how Americans are, we don't travel. We don't learn other languages. We certainly don't travel the way the Europeans do. We don't learn other languages. We don't learn about other cultures and traditions. And we don't even explore our own country very much. certainly compared to other people around the globe. Have we as Christians not done a very good job of learning about other faiths, misunderstanding Judaism, which the Pope, I believe, once Stephen referred to the Jewish community as our older brothers, if I have that right, I'm working from memory. Have we accepted the twisting of the little bit that we do know about Islam because we've not taken the time to learn the truth of it? Are we not too good as Christians about learning, and not to mention the pure peace that seems to come from the Buddhist and Sikh and religions of the East? Have we done a poor job of learning such things and getting outside of ourselves and embracing, again, in the greater sense, our neighbors? Thoughts?
Well, when we come from an orientation, and it can be done biblically, justifying the fact that this is the only way. And, you know, for a lot of Christians, they look at the scriptures and they say, this is the only way there is to God through Christ. But Christ himself says there are other groups out there that serve God that are different from my own group. You know, that's a paraphrase, but basically that's what's being communicated there by Christ himself. And when we tend to think ours is the only way, then why have any dialogue with anybody that's different? If my way is the only way, then to hell with everyone else. And unfortunately, that's the orientation of a lot of people. But interfaith dialogue is incredibly important, and it's hard work. It is definitely, and I've done that with the Muslim community as well as Jewish community. And there are points of agreement, and that's where you start, with points of agreement. But then trying to at least communicate, here's how we interpret this. And here's, you know, and then hearing someone else say, this is how we interpret it, and they're radically different. There are points in which we will never agree. But that doesn't mean we can't be in coexistence with another individual or another faith and respect the right for them to exist and to create their own communities. So yeah, Christians are oftentimes very isolated and into themselves, to the point where they are not willing to acknowledge that there is even a legitimate other approach to encountering God, who is infinite, than just the one that they know. That's where we fall down.
Our dearest friend here of the program has jumped the gun. I'm going to make him feel a little guilty just a tiny bit. And Randall has called into the program. The program has many, many, many friends, but certainly none above Randall. So Randall, get to your question there, young man. You are on the air.
Young man, Jeff, I'm 69, and Kevin's probably 67 now. And I don't know how Reverend Stephen, how old he is, but he looks to be like in his early 40s. Any case, I lost you.
No, I'm here. Go for it. Tell us, give us a question. Have at it.
Okay. My question, well, first off, Jeff, thank you for inviting Reverend Kevin Frederick on your program.
No, we thank him for accepting. I invite a lot of people on this program who won't come anywhere near it. And I think partially because they're afraid to come here, politicians especially, and business leaders even more so. We thank them for coming. Me making the invitation, I invite a lot of people. Me making the invitations easy. Them coming here and devoting this much time to us is that's what we should be thankful for.
And Reverend Stephen, thank you for coming on the program, bro.
What's your
You're welcome.
question, Randall? Let's get to it.
Okay, let's get to it. I am a Presbyterian Christian, and I am a liberal progressive Democrat Presbyterian Christian. And this show has been incredible. After Jeff, this has definitely been one of your best shows you've ever done. It has been so intellectual. It has been so informative. It's been so, I don't even know what the word I'm looking for is. But, like, wow. I usually call in earlier, Jeff. Obviously, you know me. But I had to listen. I missed my family dinner night. I had my oldest daughter and her family over, and I missed my family dinner night because I had to see this from when it started at 5 p.m. tonight to keep up with everything. And between Stephen and Kevin going back and forth with your questions and your comments, it's, like I said, it's just, this is one of your best shows, Jeff. Stephen, what parameters do we move towards in the future? Not just in the Catholic Church, not just in the Universal Christian Church. What parameters do we move towards in the future to shine on the true teachings of Christ that, well, here in our U.S. society is becoming more and more a minority opinion of what true Christianity is?
So are you asking how do we stop this twist?
How do we get to the future? Same thing with you, Kevin. How do we get to the future of truly practicing Christ's teachings in our society instead of what I consider negative teachings under certain denominations, and the Catholic Church has their evangelistic movement in their church that I see some things where they want to practice prosperity, economic Christianity.
Let's let the smart people answer.
All right.
Yeah, I think I wish there was like a simple, easy answer to this question, but I think it begins by not letting people who espouse the prosperity gospel to dominate the conversation. I think one thing that the right broadly has done very well in the past 40 odd years is develop a media ecosystem that often serves as an exclusive source of information for people who think in that way. And I think that's allowed certain viewpoints and certain understandings to become the only thing a lot of people hear, partly from the pulpit, but also from where they get their news from the cultural institutions they're involved in. And when you hear the same thing over and over and over and over again, it becomes difficult to challenge it in a substantive way. And that's not to excuse necessarily people's behavior that flows from some of these beliefs, but I think it becomes easier to understand why people might begin to think in a certain way. And I think we got to figure out ways to break into some of those spaces. nonviolently. I'm using break metaphorically here, but to get a different understanding of Christianity out there. I think Pope Francis has done a good job of that, but as popular and as big as his platform is, he can't do it alone. I think there's a role for all of us to play, even if it's just in the way we talk to our family and friends, and how we witness to the gospel, how we speak about the gospel to the people we know.
Kevin, how about you?
Yeah.
Randall's question: How do we return to the if I can use a word here, Randall? How do we return to the traditional teachings of the church, as opposed to the twisted values and ideals that we've been discussing pretty much throughout the program? How do we get back there?
Jeff, I wouldn't even call them traditional. I'd call them prophetic.
Okay.
The prophetic voice of the church. One of the things that you see going back to the prophets of the Old Testament is that there's always a faithful remnant. You've got all kinds of people that are distorting truth and distorting faith and distorting the culture and the community of faith, but you have a faithful remnant. One of the things that I promised myself, and it's just my basic orientation, that I would strive to be faithful and true to the prophetic gospel in a way that at times has gotten me in trouble with people that I know and love. At times it's put me at odds with folks, but that's the message that I believe, that there are people always, we've seen it historically, Randall and I both are students of history, where you see the ebb and flow of society moving away or moving towards one position or another. And what is needed now, as much as anything in this day and time, is that faithful remnant to keep proclaiming the prophetic gospel. That's where we are. And I do believe that there are a substantial number of churches out there that are committed to that. Now, this COVID thing has made it awfully hard to be church. I retired a year ago this past month, and what I learned in the last year of ministry, which was the first year of COVID, I changed and grew more probably in that last year in response to COVID, figuring out ways to have meetings online, have the message proclaimed on a video screen instead of in person, and to do ministry in a vacuum. But you do it. I mean, we never gave up. We never said, oh, this is Sunday and it's COVID and we can't do anything. We did say we will not meet in person because we felt that was faithful to the whole pandemic and the realities that we face. But we continued to meet. We continued to do the work of the church in a faithful way. And that's the only hope I see. It's not how do we turn the majority around? How do we continue to proclaim the faith and hope that people listen? Now you might say that's pretty pessimistic, but I don't see it that way. There are people who do listen, and God works through individual lives in ways that astound me at times. And I'm sure Stephen would say the same thing about people he's served. But it is the faithfulness and the willingness to say, yes, I will get up today and do this again as I have for all these years, because it is the God I serve. It is a faith that I believe in. And that's what's needed, is just those faithful individuals who will continue to serve.
All good, Randall? I missed somebody else who tried to call in. All good?
Well, I just got one last thing to say.
Please.
I'm a member of a very small Presbyterian church here in it's in Aston, PA, Delaware County, Delco. I live right next door in Brookhaven Borough now, and I've been locked down for over 2 years. Maybe 2 years, 2 months, because I locked down in January of 2020, knowing what was coming, knowing what was going to happen, but I didn't know what's going to happen. I went out and I bought canned goods, I bought toilet paper, I bought everything, paper towels, I bought gloves. Before, you couldn't buy those things to prepare my family for what could have happened or did happen in some senses. And like I said, I've been locked down for 2 years and almost 3 months now. Since I first read the little tidbits of information coming out on the news of COVID being in China in December of 2019. And yeah, I've been locked down, have not gone out, don't see anybody except my immediate family. Everybody here, adults are all fully immunized and fully boosted. My 2 oldest grandsons, my 7-year-old, my 6-year-old, they are fully boosted. And I'm just waiting for the FDA and the CDC to give an okay for emergency use for my third grandson, 3 years old, and my first granddaughter, 3 years old, to get vaccinated. My school district did away. They're controlled by Republicans. The school board president, the vice president, and one of their biggest on the board, they're all Trumpites. They are absolutely against mask mandates or absolutely against anything. And yeah, I'm glad to hear, because I got one grandson here in Brookhaven going to our local school district. And I just keep asking, do you wear a mask? Yes, Grandpa. Does everybody else wear their mask? Some of them do, Grandpa. No. The radicals have taken over. They're going down to our local government. They're taking over our local school districts and our local government to do their agenda, which is not Christ's agenda. Christ's agenda is look after your neighbor, not yourself. And anyway.
We got you.
All right.
We got you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Stephen. And this show has been incredible intellectually. Incredible.
And I had nothing to do with it. The intellectualism is coming from these guys. I got nothing to do with it. I'm just clicking buttons over here.
I didn't say that, Jeff. I said Stephen and Kevin.
All right. Thank you, my friend. I missed a couple other folks trying to get in. So thank you, my friend.
Love you all.
All right. Have a great night. We have cleared the phone lines. If there's anybody else who wants to dial in, now is a good time. 267. How long has it been since I've done my own show? I forgot my own phone number. 267-227-9189. 267-227-9189. Before someone else rings in, gentlemen, I wanted to ask you about this. From an environmental standpoint, is kind of where I'm coming from. And again, this is something that Pope Francis has spoken about, the environment. I would be guessing futilely to know where this came in, but it does state in the Bible that God gave man dominion over the earth and the creatures of the earth. I don't think he gave us dominion to destroy the entire thing, did he?
No.
Or did she?
No, if you understand that passage, it is to be tillers and keepers. In other words, to be caregivers of the earth. Yes,
to be stewards in a manner of
Yes.
speaking.
So there is you are blessed with the opportunity to reap the abundance of creation, but you have a responsibility to creation to maintain its ability to provide. So an accurate understanding of Genesis, which that story comes out of, really has to do with both being the ones to receive the abundance, but also the ones to give the care for it, for creation itself.
Isn't it amazing how prescient the Bible can be?
Absolutely.
I mean, who at the time of taking the word and putting it to paper was thinking of the 21st century and the deep and rampant environmental damage we are doing, literally changing the face of the planet. But yet somehow that passage speaks to us and says, yes, this is your planet, but not to rape, pillage, and destroy, and not leave anything for the future generations, but rather to be stewards of, to be maintainers of. I find sometimes the prescience of the Bible to be truly awe-inspiring at times, and including these, as we spoke earlier in the program, about these times of justice and equality and fairness and ideals and principles that are laden throughout the New Testament: fairness, justice, equality, caring for one another, knowing thy neighbor, and so on. It's the prescience of it is I sometimes just, it's all inspiring. We do have another caller on the air, area code 610. Is this possibly Chris? Have at it. You're on the air.
Hi, Jeffrey. Thank you.
It is. Hey.
Yep, it is me. Hi, everybody out there in Radio Land. It's Christopher. First, I want to give you a little bit of content from my background. Guess what? I was raised in an evangelical church. Nothing was offensive. I know we were talking about that, but you know, it's interesting how we were talking about it, and I just want to share my experience. Where I noticed that there were two things going on in the evangelical movement. We talked a lot about the prosperity teaching, but if you go back to President Carter, he was pushing for the gospel movement. Anybody ever see, he's always talking about music, doing Sunday school church. He won the evangelical vote in 1976.
He did.
And the reason why was he's building multiculturalism. We're going to be a multiracial democracy, right? We hear this is really prevalent today. And when I went to church, there were two songs that was drilled into me. Go Tell It on the Mountain, and Jesus Loves the Children of the World. Red and yellow, black and white, they're precious in His sight. And that was the culture. And the culture was about evangelizing. That's where evangelicals believed in. Evangelicalism was very conservative in terms of ways that we don't even think about. Should women be wearing dresses? Should divorce was extraordinarily frowned on? Not the issues that we even talk about today, like very, very ultra conservative in that context. And it really got politicized with the preaching the gospel. And you think about that, right? Multicultural democracy versus laissez-faire capitalism. You're doing better if you're rich, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it really was the politicization of it, at least from my internal kind of view. And I think it was so sad because had they really embraced that gospel teaching, many of the things that like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talks about would be the values that is part of the culture. But I do have a question for, and I know Reverend Stephen Dewitt personally, and you once said something like, almost like you see yourself almost in the frame of a Christian socialist. And we kind of, in our culture of these mega churches, we have these these affluent people running around in their Cadillac Escalades. It seems almost like everything God is against. You know, God tells you, what is the first tenet of the Bible? Protect. This is the earth, and you're a steward of it, right? Environmentalism is the first tenet of the Bible, right? So you're environmentally destroying. It talks about being humble and the fruit of the Spirit. And I wonder what's your experience like watching politically when people when you see that kind of like other side of things, or like a politician who drives a $50,000 car but will identify as a socialist, and kind of you're more living in your environment, you're living in cultural poverty. Sorry if I'm divulging too much here. I always see you as like the reason why I wouldn't call myself a socialist, because I feel you live the values of it, right? You live the lived value of a socialist, right? You're living and you're choosing to be highly educated. You could make money out in the private world. You're brilliant. And yet you're choosing this kind of socialist lifestyle. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I guess what I can say is I kind of half joke with people sometimes that, like, most of the best parts of socialism they borrowed from Christianity. And so when I call myself a Christian socialist, I do that because I think democratic socialism is the political philosophy that's closest to my own thinking. It's not a perfect alignment, but it's the closest, I think, to the kind of world that the gospel ultimately describes. And for me, the root of it lies in the fact that since everything that exists is ultimately a creation of God's, that ultimately everything belongs to God. And it's been given to us to use to take care of our needs and to meet our needs. But because it's not ultimately ours, we have no right to withhold it, to take more than we need, or to withhold from others what they need if we have the ability to give it to them. And I want to acknowledge that many Christians don't see it the same way, and that's fine. And I think you asked too about, I guess, what I think about other people and how they live. And I guess I don't see it as my job to pass judgment on other people's lifestyles. I hope that, that I try and focus on living my own understanding of Christianity as authentically as possible, in the hope that that will attract other people. And through witnessing to that, I can perhaps call others to consider and evaluate how they live.
Oh, I bet he bumped a button. He hung up on himself. But we skip over it. Don't too many of us skip over that, or do we skip over it intentionally within our own internal separation between politics, economics, and faith and religion? And we mentioned it earlier in the show, that Christ and the disciples and other followers lived communally. Is that this might be more of a historical question, I guess, and it might even be a little bit of guessing, so to speak, but why do you believe that they did that? Was that Christ saying this is our natural state? Was it living his words? Why did they live that way? And what should we be learning from that? What should we be taking from that?
As I have studied that whole issue of communal living and how the church, how can the church today express that and communicate that? We have to go back historically to Old Testament times. The whole book of Leviticus, particularly, I think it's the 25th chapter of Leviticus, talks about the Jubilee, in which there is this reset going on in society where if you've been enslaved, you're free. And the year of Jubilee is once every 50 years. And that whole notion of biblical Jubilee was an ideal and a principle that even the Hebrew people never fully lived up to. That notion, when we advance in time now to the early Christian church, and you had this community of faith and people trying to live in harmony with one another. The whole book of First Corinthians, both First and Second Corinthians, is addressing an imperfect community of faith that is struggling with how to live that out, which is why in that you've got the Apostle Paul writing the love chapter and the parts of the body that need each other. And love is not just simply words, it is the way we act and interrelate with each other every day. With the reason that was written is because they were struggling in that first century with how to live the life of a communal faith. We've never gotten it right, but you got the biblical ideals out there to point us in the direction of what the truth is. And I find some comfort in going back and realizing, well, even that first generation, they got it right for a little while. There were some groups that did, but there were also a lot of groups that missed the boat or that messed it up as badly as the Corinthians did in the Paul's church at Corinth. So it's the ideal, and it's the importance of ministers to present that ideal to the community of faith and say, this is where we need to be guided by in our principles and the way we live our lives. Some people are going to do that, other people aren't. But we keep the witness, if you will, the witness of faith of that ideal before people, and find tangible ways to make it real so that people can say, yes, we are making progress in this, but it's never ending. I mean, the fact that you're dealing with imperfect human beings and imperfect leaders like myself and Stephen of human beings in communities of faith, we don't always get it right. But that's also part of the message of the gospel is human sin is universal.
Would it be a stretch to analogize this with the search and or pursuit, in Jefferson's words, of a more perfect union?
I think so.
Or is that a bad analogy? Did I just make a bad analogy?
No, I think it holds in the sense that, Jefferson was holding up the union as an ideal to strive for, but one that we'll probably never perfectly realize here in the world. And I think, given what you've been describing is, that's also I think that's the nature of any human endeavor, but it's certainly the nature of the church is that, we try and set forth a certain vision of what the world can be, how it's possible to live if we really embody fully the values that Jesus taught, while recognizing that we're never going to fully realize them in this world. And the second part of that message too, I think that's okay. God loves us anyways, which that's a fact I am grateful for every day. But I think you're right, though. And what's important is that we continue to hold up the ideal as the thing towards which we are striving. And the idea, and just, even coming back to socialism and the idea of what that means is, I don't think it's necessary for everyone to live in a literal community. That's the Catholic tradition of religious life, and I think it's a valuable tradition, obviously, or I wouldn't be part of it. But there are other ways of doing it as well. I think the important thing is is holding on to an understanding of community that emphasizes what I think we've come back to again and again in this discussion, that we have a responsibility to each other as individuals and as a society that, that can never be ignored. When we do, that's when we start to distort the faith and the gospel.
My final reset of the program is 7:30. I'm going to ask my guests for about 15-ish, 20-ish, a little more minutes, then I'm going to release them from their video captivity and get them back to their Sunday evenings. And we are going to endeavor to wrap up right here at 8 p.m. Wherever you might be on Facebook, we've shared the program to about 100 places. That other side of information is our home group page. It's been an active chat. I thank every single one of you. Wherever you may catch this program, whatever group, whatever time, we thank you. We could not be here if you are not there. And this program is built on every single individual one of you. If you weren't listening and watching, we would not have a program. Hot101.net is the website, Apple App Store, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio app, and tell Alexa to play Hot101.net. TCP, the Culture Professional, on Facebook, Roku, radio, and television. 267-227-9189 is the number. There's two questions, and maybe a more relaxed question, gentlemen. We've talked some very heady, very serious, heavy topics and thoughts and different meanings tonight. I want to ask you a bit more of a relaxed question, if I might. What is your favorite, or what do you believe is the best interpretation, presentation of Christ on film?
Ooh, wow.
I'll answer mine, but I don't want to bias the the answer. I'm a Jesus of Nazareth, Christopher Powell. I believe that, the man just was Christ, but what say you? Oh, I stumped him.
Yeah.
I've ground the show to a halt. I stumped everybody.
I think I will say the answer that jumps to mind is I haven't actually watched a lot of movies or programs that literally depict Christ, but a lot of adaptations of the Gospels. I've seen Jesus of Nazareth. I've never watched the crucifixion for any number of reasons we could talk about some other time, but I would say the best presentation of what it means for another human being to embody who Christ was would be Les Mis. And you can pick, the novel version's great. There are several good movies. The musical is also excellent. I often draw from that story and its various presentations and preaching. And I think like Jean Valjean, is one of the best presentations of what it looks like when someone struggles to be faithful, doesn't succeed all the time, doesn't get it right all the time, but continues to seek to be better and to follow God as Christ did, and Christ calls us to.
It's interesting, Jeff. Both of us were thinking of not narratives about Jesus, but films that convey a principle of faith. And because I have two of them that come to mind. One is Terms of Endearment, where at the end of that movie, you see the people gathering in church, and they have this encounter not only with communion and this sense of being in relationship with Christ, but there's also this background of all the people who have been part of who made them who they are, that are also coming to the table. So you have this witness of saints, if you will, these people that are no longer living, but who impact their lives and also are coming to the same table. The second movie, though, that strikes me that I've always loved is one called Babette's Feast. It's about a French woman who is a chef, and she becomes Christ to this group of Dutch Reformed, or, you know, the lowlands, low countries of Europe, where they are rigid Calvinists. And she breaks down the rigidity in their lives through her love and hospitality. That is a powerful witness of faith that inspires me to break down the rigidity of people's lives, both left and right, Jeff, that are intolerant of other people, or intolerant of their views. That, I think, is really a critical issue that we're facing in our society, is an intolerance on both sides of the equation, where we're not able to listen or acknowledge another person as legitimate in their own eyes, but maybe not ours, but who we need to be able to remain in dialogue and in community with in some form or fashion, if there is ever going to be any kind of radical change in our society.
Why do you think we have failed to learn from, or purposefully, or maybe not purposefully, forgotten some of the lessons from the Holocaust and the way Catholics helped Jews, the way, well, everybody helped, you know, people of all faiths, people of no faith,
right,
helped Jews, gypsies, gays, the unequally abled to escape certain death. Why have we lost that?
I don't know that we've lost it. It doesn't catch the headlines. I think there are people out there that are living out their faith and living out their sense of the social gospel, the justice ministries of life. But that doesn't catch the headlines, and it doesn't catch the attention of the society. We're far too interested in what some other SOB thinks and acts and does, and we talk about that more than we do about the gracious acts of kindness that are expressed in our society every day.
Stephen?
Yeah, I would. I'm thinking something similar in that. I think it's not that people have stopped living the gospel. It's just, it's less in the headlines. It's less public, probably because it doesn't sell as many. I was going to say sell as many newspapers, but I don't know if that's the metric anymore. Get as many views on YouTube or as many likes on Facebook or what have you. And sometimes it's charity, sometimes it's justice. But I'm thinking about something that happened at the soup kitchen where I worked during the pandemic, where we had to switch from having a dining room that people could come into to, you know, bagging up meals to give to people. And I think we were running out of bottled water to give out. And it was something that went out on our social media. There is you know, if anyone had a little bit of water they could do, and we were thinking we'd get a few cases. You know, someone showed up with a pallet of water and within 24 hours. And at a time when, you know, a lot of people were struggling with rent and with, you know, dealing with having their kids home and schooling and all sorts of other things. And I think, you know, if you look around, there are examples like that are out there. You just don't hear about them as much.
A little over 5 years ago, I lost my father. And I have not been the same human being since. And I fear I never will be. I believe so much of the reason that I think the statistic is somewhere in the neighborhood between 2/3 and 3/4 of all the healthcare dollars you will ever spend in your life are spent within your final 5 years of life. And it is largely because we fear death. And this big tall, muscular, strapping man, as he was dying of cancer, was afraid. And I am not, and I'm not so sure that's a healthy thing either. But he was afraid at the end. And why do we still fear the end so much? Maybe this is unfair, but if our faith is solid, if our faith is clear, Christ tells us it's not the end, but simply a new beginning. So why do we fear it so much?
It's the great unknown. No one's come back from the other side to tell us it's going to be fine. Although we do hear near-death experiences and people who have died on an operating table and who've come back and who tell us that very thing, that they saw light, they saw great hope, but they also realized that it wasn't their time, and they were told it wasn't their time. We fear the unknown. We also fear the things that we don't have done in our past that are we know were wrong, and we regret, or we live with an inability to forgive ourselves at times for things that we've done wrong, and everyone has. And so it's that combination, I think, that you bring to that moment of saying there are no guarantees. And yeah, I've lived my life and I've followed faith, but whose faith is ever universally strong? Even Christ on the cross struggled. Let this cup pass from my lips. Nevertheless, not my will, thy will be done, he says.
Father, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah, but why have you forsaken me? The total abandonment, which is a quote from Psalm 22. If you want to understand that phrase, go to Psalm 22 and read it in its entirety. And what you see is the psalm starts out with this sense of, I've been abandoned by God. And then at the end, it praises God. It is a powerful witness of faith that says, yes, we all go through those hard times and those parts where we don't know and we're fearful. But there's also claim in the midst of that. Even if it's just a fingernail's hair, breath that you've got, claim that faith and proclaim it to yourself in that moment. That's my only hope. I've stood beside several people, a number of people over the years who have been on death's bed. And to know that when the end comes, it is a peaceful, at least in the ones that I've been there for, a peaceful moment for most people, but not for everyone. And I think the difference is our ability to say, I release this, oh God, into your hands, which is what Jesus did on the cross. Into your hands I commend my spirit. That is a constant, regular prayer of mine as I live, and I expect to be able to say it on my deathbed, even if I'm stricken with a heart attack and die instantly. I'm in the hands of God.
What I would add to all of that is that I think sometimes we think that faith means we're free from fear or doubt or hesitancy. And, that's very much not true.
Right.
That would make us something other than human. And faith doesn't make us less human, it makes us more human. And what I think that manifests is that it's not that these emotions and these fears and doubts disappear. It's just we're sure we're going to be strong enough to hold on to faith, to hold on to belief, in the face of them, even when we're not sure, even when we don't know for certain. And death is the ultimate expression of that. We can never know for certain until we get there, but faith promises that, we're going to be able to hold on. I'm thinking here of the Catholic sacrament of the anointing of the sick. And when I've gone to anoint people, what I tell them is we pray for two things in that sacrament. One of which is for physical or mental healing, that whatever the ailment that they've asked for anointing for will be healed. But I say that may happen, that may not. We don't know. We pray for it, we hope, but we don't know. The second thing we pray for in that sacrament is that people's faith be strengthened, that they may endure in their belief in the face of whatever comes. And I tell them that part always comes. That part is always there. It's like, none of us know what the future will be, but if we are people of faith, what we can say is, whatever it is, we'll be okay.
Jeff, I think we've
I hope
stopped,
so. I really
teaching and
hope
gone
so.
to meddling now. We're dealing with the personals
No.
of faith.
I just hope so. I just hope so. Because too many have gone before me. Some have gone before me who shouldn't have. Some I would trade places with in a heartbeat. But he is definitely, I hope he is there when I get there, because I have not been the same since. And I suspect I won't be. And I've never gotten over it. And I never will. And it is a very powerful thing when you go to visit and someone's not there, or make the call and no one answers. It's a very powerful thing. And I have not been the same. And I won't be. Before I let you go, gentlemen, I have bad news for you. It is the same bad news I offer to every new guest on our program. You're in the family now. You're part of the family now. And I very much hope that this is not the only time that we see you and hear from you. And please, please, please know how eternally grateful I am that you would give us so much time and so much of your wisdom. And if there is ever something that you feel the need to come and speak to my audience, please know that the door is open to you. You know how to log into the program, so the door is open. I beg you, please know that the door is open to you. I simply don't have enough words to express my thanks to you. This is a program I have wanted to do since the program started. And I still feel like even with the amount of time that we've spent, we still probably haven't hit so many of the angles and sides of the issue that we probably could. But what I want to let you do before I say goodnight to you, and then a few minutes later, probably to the top of the hour, say goodnight to the audience, is if there is anything for either of you, if there is anything that we did not cover, or that we did not get to cover completely, or we started down a road and kind of stopped and made a turn, or if there's anything that you want to make sure that you tell my audience, I just want to turn the floor over to you completely, no directions, no questions, I just want to turn the floor over to you. If there's, as I said, if there's anything we didn't finish, we didn't get to, anything you want to offer, I would just want to open the floor to you and just please have at it. Whoever wants to jump.
I've got a point I want to share with you, Jeff, that I think, and I want to share with your audience. I realize not everyone that's out there is Christian. but I do want folks to know that there are differences within Christianity, which is what we've been saying all night. And that there are ways that the Christian community can be in harmony and working side by side with social justice issues that are living out the faith of some of us Christians, if not, even the majority of them. Don't give up on the Christian group because of the stuff that you see in the headlines and that touts a distorted understanding of Christianity. Recognize that there are allies out there in working towards these causes, and we're there for this. So that's what I'd like to share with the folks.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, it's been my pleasure to be here. So thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be able to accept. And I think what I want to say by way of closing is simply that it's easy, I think, right now to look at the state of the country and the world and, to be without hope, to say everything's bad, everything's awful, and it's not getting any better. And I think if there's one thing that both life and my study of the gospel and Christianity and my own faith journey has taught me, is that there's always hope. But hope is a lived emotion. To an extent, we make it a reality by assuming its existence and living accordingly. You could call it fake it till you make it, but I think it's really more powerful than that. I think it's, if we really believe in the world we want to see, if we try and live that out in our lives and our interactions with others, bit by bit, we'll make it possible. Maybe not as quickly or as easily or in exactly the form we would choose, but we will bring it into being. And so I would say to people, don't lose hope, and remember that, what you do matters, that you live out these values, that you even when it's difficult, that you stay true to them. You may not always see exactly how they matter, but they do matter, and it will make a difference.
And gentlemen, last thing, how do people find you, reach you, follow you? Kevin, your group working against domestic violence, how do folks find you, follow you? I don't know if you're big social media people, but if folks wanted to reach out and learn more about your work, your teachings, your faith, etc., what is the best way for folks to do that generally?
Well, with my work with domestic violence, we haven't really developed a web page yet. A lot of what I'm doing is working through individuals that are facilitators for teaching courses. But I guess the best way, I'm on Facebook. That would be one place. I'd be willing for you to share. I'm not quite open to saying, here's my email address.
Oh, well, yeah, no, we don't need to do whatever you're comfortable doing. I'm just,
but if you were to refer,
we tend to get a small handful of folks who will follow the folks who have been on the program and, try to keep up with how things are going with them and so on, especially the candidates and so on as we get closer to election and things like that. Sure. That's really all. If you're not good with an email, don't worry about that. I was just wondering if there was a way that folks can follow your work and so on.
That's a good question. I'll give that thought. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I don't have a big social media presence. I have a Twitter account. I mostly use it to follow other people, but people could get me a message there at Stephen OFM. And I'm also on LinkedIn. that's I update that a little bit more than my Twitter account, but that's about it.
Well, again, I hate to end the program with bad news, but welcome to the family. And I very much hope, I truly, deeply hope this is not the only time that we get to talk. I have a feeling that this is a conversation that we could probably have almost every week, watching the different events going on in our neighborhoods, our counties, our states, and our country, and on this planet, and to speak to them within the context of faith and scripture and doctrine, and it's interesting. There are other places that do it, but I think they do it from that sort of dictatorial right wing, you're not doing this right kind of way, rather than, if I might say, from a preachy sort of way, which is not probably how I mean it, but it's this kind of exchange, I think, is exceptionally helpful. I think it's just different. I don't know that it's happening very much. And I really, really have wanted to have this program pretty much since we started. So you have indulged me. You have given me a tremendous amount of time. I mean, I'm just very, very grateful. Please know I'm very grateful. And I believe the audience is too. And I just need to say thank you. And please know that you are always, always welcome here. And I very much hope that we will speak again, and that we will have the opportunity to do this again.
Thank you for hosting us tonight, Jeff. It's been a pleasure to share, points of view that and to know that there's a group of people out there willing to listen.
Amen to that.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen. Please have a great rest of your night. My deep thanks.
Bye-bye.
That does it for us, folks, for this week. It is 7:56, just 4 little minutes before we say goodnight to you. Let me tell you what's going to be coming now in the next few weeks. Next week is Super Bowl. Whether we like it or not, it is the biggest American sporting event. I am sure the overwhelming preponderance of you will want to watch it. Therefore, we will step aside and do exactly that, because the game itself, of course, will start, I think they usually kick off around 6:30. So I'm sure we could jam in a little program there, but we're good. And this guy's health isn't still great. So, we'll leave you to Super Bowl for next week. And then we will return on... Should have had the calendar open. So the 13th is Super Bowl. We will return on February 20th. We have guests lined up for the 20th, and for March 6th, nothing for the 27th yet. So I need to get working on that. Certainly one of the parts of this that I truly dislike is lining up guests, because it's really just asking and asking and asking and asking. And you have to think about, really, I'm used to doing this program. I'm used to sitting here with you for 3 to 4 hours every Sunday. That's not a normal thing for most people to do. So the fact that, we got, think about it really seriously, a total of 6 hours out of our 2 guests tonight. I mean, obviously it was at the same time, but that's 3 hours from Stephen, 3 hours from Kevin. It's a big deal. And they were beyond kind with their time. Every guest that comes here is beyond kind with their time. So that is pretty much what we're looking at upcoming in the next couple of weeks. We will be off next week. It's Super Bowl week. Enjoy the game. Enjoy it. If you're a football fan, if you're not a football fan, if you just only watch the NFL when Super Bowl comes, whatever it is, it's next week. We will be off so that you all can watch and enjoy. And we will return on the 20th. What am I forgetting? I think that's it. Please remember all of our different social media platforms where you can find us. Our home group Facebook page is right up there on the screen right now. That Other Side of Information. You can email this program. If you have a product, a service, a business, whatever it might be that you want to promote and grow, do not let a political program frighten you from advertising. Progressives buy products too. We hire people too. We patronize businesses too, especially if you have a small business. We tend to patronize more small businesses. Just saying. You can promote it here and literally have a global audience, a worldwide audience. Email us and ask us how we can do that. YouTube, That Other Side of Information, probably the best way to learn about, catch up with, and be on top of the program. If you missed any of tonight, if you missed any of any program, YouTube is the best place to go. YouTube.com/That Other Side of Information. Instagram, I got to be honest about Instagram. I have never posted anything there. I always assume George does it. And if he's not, then the Instagram is pretty crappy. Patreon is where you can become a subscriber and donate to the program monetarily. And we're not asking you for $1,000 a month. Some of our subscription levels are literally $1, $2, $5. And every dime, and I mean every dime that you donate into this program goes back into the program. It does not go into my pocket. It does not profit any of that. It keeps the program going. And you can find show announcements in a video form on TikTok, That Other Side of Information. And as you are aware, all of these social media platforms have either a like, a subscribe, a support, whatever it might be. We ask you to do all of those at any of our social media platforms, at all of our social media platforms. Like, subscribe, whatever the thing is that keeps you in touch with us. We ask you to stay in touch with us. George, is there anything you need to add? Anything I forgot? Anything before we release the wild creatures back into the winter wilderness?
No, there's nothing.
All right, fair enough. George, if you didn't notice, ducked out in the middle of the program. I've now cut his pay back to zero.
Sorry about that.
We went from 5 cents all the way back to zero. Unbelievable.
Yep.
Unbelievable. 5 more cents for me.
Just can't get that nickel.
Just can't break out of that zero, man.
Can't break out of that zero. No.
Can't break the shell of that egg, huh? Oh God, I'm so tired. Anyway, that does it for us for this week. Yeah, I mean, that does it. I want to say something terribly pithy and very, very smart, but I can't. I think I'm out of words. It's been 3 hours. George will be happy that we kept it a bit shorter. Hopefully the conversion will be less painful. And you can also always find me at Our Revolution, Pennsylvania as well. You can find me on Facebook in my own timeline, not just the group. And you can find me at Our Revolution, Pennsylvania. So that does it for this week. In the spirit, no pun intended, in the spirit of the program tonight, I pray for you and wish you a peaceful, happy, and safe week. Please get vaccinated. And also in the spirit of our program, please look out for one another. Please check on your neighbors, on any senior citizens that might be in your neighborhood. Please take care of yourself and your families, and please be kind to one another. We are a community. We are a society. We are not a group of rugged individualists, as Thatcher and Reagan tried to convince us that we are. We are a community. We are a society. We are a nation. We are neighborhoods. We are counties. We are states. We are nations. We are one planet. There is no planet B. There is only Earth. Nowhere for us to run. So we better get it straight here. We can do that by talking to each other and taking care of each other. And I beg you and pray for you to do that this week. Please take care of yourselves and each other. For Lynn and George, Dare, for France, for everyone at Hot 101, Earl, Lex, for April Riddick, for everyone at TCP, and for Kristen, of course. I am Jeff Kennedy, and we will see you in 2 weeks on February 20th. Enjoy the Super Bowl. Stay safe. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Please have a wonderful week and good night.